Okay, now it's recording, so officially it's the second lecture. We are still in the basic concepts. We will be here over the next couple of weeks. Maybe we will finish on the 22nd, maybe we will finish on the 29th, but the videos will be uploaded to YouTube. It's fixed now. I'm repeating this, you already heard it, simply because I have to record it again, and some of you are not able to attend today, so for the recording everything has to be here in the video. So it's still empty, but it won't be empty after, let's say, 1 or 2 p.m. When both this video and last week's video that has been fixed will be there. So that's it when it comes to the pleasantries and the beginning. Now let's do the review. So what we did last week and what you should know for your future studies is that language is a modular system, and this course deals with just one part of it. We are not dealing with how your concepts, when you say, for example, somebody feminine who loves you without conditions, who gave birth to you, why you open your mouth, and in Serbian it's majka and in English it's mother, for example. That's phonology. So what we are dealing with here is syntax, how these concepts in your mind actually are organized into sequences of let's say organized units, so that you get a sentence that has a full meaning. We are also not dealing here with the meaning. So in grammar we are happy when the sentence is grammatical. So colorless green ideas, it's okay, it's grammatical but it's meaningless. So syntax and meaning, they are not necessarily on the same page. Something can be grammatical but meaningless, but something can be ungrammatical. For example, when you say me Tarzan, you Jane, we love, that's not grammatical, but it has meaning. We will deal, however, with morphology. For example, if you have the verb catch, how you form the forms of the other forms of that verb, such as catches, caught, catching, etc. And language also contains vocabulary. So if any of these systems, somebody should mute himself because there's echo. So if any of these systems fails to perform, the communication will fail as well. Somebody should really unmute. I can hear myself. Not unmute, mute. I couldn't show you that last week, but I gave you the link, and I will post the link to the website. So what you have to know for the oral exam and for the theory lectures and practice classes throughout your studies is that grammar of your native language, like let's say Serbian, is a set of innate language rules. Why do we call them innate? That means that they are in your brain, and they are in your brain because of the way you were, brought up as a baby. You were listening to Serbian, and without any thinking, you know what's acceptable. If you say devojčica je otišlo, it's ungrammatical, but if you have to explain why it's ungrammatical, it will take some time to understand and explain. And this grammar is, of course, in sync with other components of language, phonology, morphology, and semantics and vocabulary. We didn't have the opportunity to watch the video with McGurk effect, but I gave you the link, and I will again put it on the website, the link to YouTube. You will see that your brain visual system can override what you hear. So you are not listening only with your ears, you are listening with your eyes as well. So grammar is in sync with many other parts of your brain. If you are a non-native speaker of English, it's not innate rules, it's learned language rules. and you know how to explain ungrammaticality, but when you measure the time in your brain that it takes for your brain to detect ungrammaticality, you actually do it slower than in your native tongue. That's why, for example, when you say John like cookies, you can immediately say this is wrong because the subject and the verb should agree in the third person singular present simple tense. You know this because this is not innate. You didn't acquire language as a kid. You learned it, so you can explain why it's ungrammatical, unlike your native tongue where you know it's ungrammatical, but sometimes it's hard to explain. But since we deal with grammar universally, the definition that applies, let's say, to both native and non-native languages that people speak is this: grammar is a system of rules. It's implicit in a language, but you either know it natively or you learned it, and those sets of rules determine which sentences are possible and grammatically acceptable. The important thing here is that grammar doesn't care about meaning. So colorless, green ideas, sleep furiously is perfectly grammatical and perfectly meaningless. So the whole point of grammar is just to produce a sentence that satisfies the grammatical rules. You may end up with something that has no meaning. And then we introduce the sentence. So grammar is about making grammatically acceptable sentences. Sentences, on the other hand, are minimal syntactic units expressing a relationship of predication. Out of many definitions that I presented you, this one is the best one because it's not about a string of words. There's internal structure in a sentence. It's not just string of words, because in that case you would be talking like the girl in the corner is eating a sandwich. You know, it's not a string of words. You somehow have to combine it, and you know where to make pauses. Additionally, especially in English, this definition makes perfect sense because in English every sentence, normal sentence, must have a predicate, must have a verb. So in English we have the fixed word order, and subject and verb are the obligatory elements. So this means that in English this is the best definition. And after that, and this is the last part of the review, we went from simply defining grammar and sentences to actually analyzing sentences at a basic level. So we always said that dating back to ancient Greece, every sentence is can be divided into subject, the theme, the old information, something that you're talking about, and the predicate, new information, what you say about the subject. In Serbian, that's rema. In English, there's also the term rim, but predicate is simply what you say about the subject. So you know John is old information. You come up to a friend of yours and say, you know what's new? John has given Mary a kiss. Like, he mustered up courage to do that. So you see, has given Mary a kiss is the predicate. This predicate contains two things: the operator and the predication. So predication is the essence of the predicate. That's what you really say about the subject. The operator is what allows you to transform the sentence into a negative, interrogative. It allows you to create a question tag to emphasize. The operator is the first auxiliary, like has here, or if there is no auxiliary verb, if you only have the main verb, lexical verb, the verb that has meaning, so love, give, unlike be, have, do, will, shall, which are grammatical auxiliary verbs, then you use do support. So the operator is so important because, as I mentioned, it allows you to make a negative transformation. He's running, he isn't running, interrogative, is he running, emphasis. Instead of saying he loves her, you say he does love her. It allows you to avoid repetition, so they will play a Mozart quartet. No, she was hoping they will play a Mozart quartet, and they will. So instead of repeating everything 2 times, you just use the operator. And of course, as we practiced, the question tag is also realized through the operator. It's always the negative form of the operator in the main part of the sentence. So he loves her. So you use the negative do support, doesn't he? Nobody has called. Haven't they? Because this is politically correct. Nobody is, of course, they, plural. Okay, and then we introduce the subject predicate operator in details, but we already covered that. So officially the lecture starts here. I really apologize, it took a lot of time to set up Discord, so we are again slightly behind the schedule. Feel free to interrupt at any point. I changed the presentation to what I originally planned to do. So the presentation was ready on Tuesday, even before the practice classes. But based on the practice classes, I noticed that some things are, let's say, not fully clear, or let's say maybe your secondary school teachers in schools, public schools and probably private schools that you were going to, maybe they failed to address some, let's say, grammatical concepts that they should have addressed. So this is not your fault. This is the whole purpose of this course, so that we are all on the same page. You are all on the same page as you move forward in your studies, so that you all have the common, let's say, understanding of the key concepts that you will use throughout your linguistic part of the university studies. So I changed the presentation, and I hope that you will see that I tried to address practical issues that we encountered in identifying syntactic constituents or sentence elements. So this happened on Tuesday. So what are we doing? So last time we stopped here. We analyzed the sentence into subject and predicate. And then in practice classes, we practically moved to the next level. We leveled up, if you like gaming. So we started analyzing the sentence in terms of subject, verb, object, complement, adverbial. So we defined these elements, let's say, in practical terms during the practice classes. So we mentioned that most people call this analysis SVOC because there's subject, verb, object, complement, and adverbial. But we didn't really, go into details on what each element really is, how you can recognize it easily, what tests you can use to identify these sentence elements. So this is what I will be doing in the next part of this presentation. So if you take a simple sentence as an example, and I like these examples with South Park because they are brutal, but they are politically acceptable because it's South Park. So Eric Cartman killed Kenny with a knife. If you don't watch South Park, this is what it looks like. This is from one of the early seasons. This was particularly brutal. If you just look at sentence elements the way we define them, so subject and predicate. Eric Cartman is the subject, predicate is killed Kenny with a knife. This doesn't tell you the whole story. It's also important that Kenny did it with a knife, not with a gun, chainsaw, bazooka, which he did in different seasons. He was very creative in killing Kenny. If you have to analyze, so this is also, I got one question, why we are doing this. We are doing this because this provides more information about the internal structure of the sentence, and if you end up working anywhere from, let's say, English language teaching to marketing and content creation, it's really important for you to be able to organize the sentence properly, because there's a big difference how you order the sentence elements. So if, for example, you say the queen opened the bridge, the important thing is that she opened the bridge, not let's say a factory that produces USB sticks. But if you say the bridge was opened by the queen, it's important that it was the queen who opened the bridge and not, for example, John Smith or nobody. This is actually, very important also in everyday communication. So you can actually, using transformations, you can change the order of sentence elements to focus on something. But that assumes that you know grammar and you know these transformations and sentence elements. So this is why we are doing it in details. That's why subject and predicate is not enough. So subject and predicate do not provide the details that are relevant. So in this case, we know that there's more than two things, more than a subject and a predicate. There's Kenny, Kenny, this is Eric. So there's Eric who did the killing, there's Kenny who was killed, there's the knife which was the instrument of killing, and these elements are bound together by the verb. So Eric Cartman, Kenny with a knife, what binds them together, if you like the Lord of the Rings, it's like the one ring. That's the verb. The verb is like the one ring. It binds all other sentence elements into a sentence. So the verb kill needs the person who is doing the activity. So you provide it. That's the subject. That's Eric. The verb kill needs the object of killing. Who was killed? The person who was killed was Kenny, poor Kenny. So Eric Cartman killed Kenny. Now the verb is satisfied. The verb kill needs the subject and the object. But in every sentence, in every language, you can add additional details about the verb. So you add meaning to the verb, and these sentence elements are called adverbials. So you say with a knife. And this is actually why we do it. This is the internal structure of the sentence in its full glory, in all the details that you can think of. Subject, object, adverbial bound together by the verb or the predicate. So this is the real analysis. Subject, verb, object, and an optional adverbial. So we did that in practice, but now let me try to properly define all these sentence elements. So what is the subject? One of the misconceptions that appeared in the practice was that subject is the first element in a sentence. Very often it is, but don't think of it as the first element. Think of it as a noun phrase, so something like a man in the corner, or even a clause. Drinking and driving is dangerous. The man in the corner is dangerous. You see, it can be a phrase, or it can be a single word, a single noun, like John is dangerous. But it can be a full clause, actually a very complex subordinate clause. Drinking and driving while under the influence is dangerous. So the subject contains drinking and driving under the influence. So typically it's a small noun phrase, like this bottle holds dangerous liquid, but as I mentioned, it can be a clause. Doesn't have to be something like drinking and driving, can be also the infinitive. To expand the boundaries of human knowledge should be the goal of every scientist. So instead of thinking that it is the first element in a sentence, think of it as the element that is before the verb phrase and immediately after the operator in question. So the easiest way to find the subject is to ask a yes/no question. The bottle holds a dangerous liquid. Does this bottle hold a dangerous liquid? You see, the subject appears between the operator and the verb phrase in the declarative, in the question. So that's, for example, the simplest way to identify the subject. Ask a yes/no question. If you are into more details, then you can, in some instances, but English has very rudimentary morphology. It's not like Latin or Serbian where every verb form has suffixes. But sometimes it's also visible that the subject agrees with the verb in person and number. We call this concord, slaganje u broju I licu. So she holds the post of associate professor. It's ungrammatical if you say they holds the post of associate professor. So I hope this helps you identify the subject, but I also added new slides where I tried to also show you the typical meanings of the subject. We said that grammar doesn't care about meaning, but grammar actually is used to create a meaningful sentence. So it very often helps to understand what the subject means. So the subject is typically the one who's doing something. So Eric Cartman killed Kenny. He's the agent of the action. It doesn't have to be Eric Cartman. For example, you can say in 1046 BC, the Roman army destroyed the city of Carthage. And here, for example, you can see that the subject is not the first element. In 146 BC is an adverbial. So the sentence doesn't have to begin with the subject, but the subject is typically the one who is doing the verbal activity. The army is who destroyed the city of Carthage. Sometimes the subject is not the agent. Sometimes the subject is simply the theme of the sentence. When you say, we are now in BC, so I chose another suitable sentence, Agamemnon was a famous king. Agamemnon is not doing anything. He's dead. So he's, rusting away somewhere in, I think, Greece, right? So Agamemnon is the theme. He's not the agent. He's dead. So he's just the theme of the sentence. But the subject, in terms of the meanings, is really, notorious. Subject can have up to 11 different meanings. So usually it's the agent or the theme of the sentence, but it can be, for example, the location. You can have a sentence such as normal, except in Serbia, the bus holds under 40 people. So the bus is not the agent. The bus is not doing anything. The bus is not a terrorist. You cannot say the bus is holding under 40 people. The bus is actually simply the location where 40 people are being driven. And it can be also many other things. For example, the subject can be the instrument. The key opened the door. The key did not turn itself by itself. So the key is not the agent. The key is not the one opening the door. Somebody is holding the key and opening the door. So the key is the instrument. And also, just like location, the subject can be the time, the location in time, which we call temporal. Tomorrow is a new day. The subject can be, let's say, also an event. The Exit Music Festival has been cancelled this year. So the Exit Music Festival is the event. So there are about 11 meanings. The good news is no other sentence element is as complicated as the subject in this sense. Most other sentence elements have very few meanings, and you can always determine their function in relationship to the subject. So every sentence in English has a subject, and the next sentence element, if you forget about optional adverbials, is always the verb. The verb is the central element. It determines everything else. It's like the one ring. Because of that, it's very difficult to define it, but you can simply say verb is the syntactic function, the syntactic element in which a verb phrase occurs. So every verb phrase is actually the verb as a sentence element. Here, you cannot use your Serbian knowledge of grammar because, unfortunately, in Serbian we don't say that this is glagol. We call this predicate. But in English there is a little bit of confusion. So verb means two things. Verb can be a part of speech, glagol. But verb can be a sentence element. So, for example, here when you say Agamemnon is a famous king, is a verb. And it's also a verb as a part of speech. So in English, it's not the happiest choice of terminology, but at least you know that it's... So in other words, as soon as you see a verb as a part of speech, so catches, running, etc., that's the main verb of the sentence. That's the verb as a sentence element. When it comes to the object, again, don't think of it as a single word. Think of it as a phrase or a clause that is behind the verb. So the terrorists are holding several hostages. Or instead of a phrase, you can say a clause. I know the terrorists are holding several hostages. The most important thing is that it's not possible for the object to be at the beginning of the sentence. So in one of the groups, we had a couple of instances where some of you said for the subject that it's the object. The object cannot be at the beginning of the sentence, at least not in English. In Serbian it's possible. Knjigu je kupio Marko. In English you always have to say Marko je kupio knjigu. Mark bought a book. It's not possible to say a book Mark bought. So object always follows the verb and the subject. So in every single English sentence the order will be subject, verb, and then the object. If you cannot identify the object, the best test you can use to identify the object is to do the passive transformation. So if, for example, you have the terrorists are holding several hostages, you can say several hostages are being held by the terrorists. The fact that the active object becomes the passive subject helps you identify it. So it also works with constructions that have two objects. So for example, when you say John gave Mary a bunch of flowers, you can say Mary was given a bunch of flowers by John, or a bunch of flowers was given to Mary by John. So it works with both direct and indirect objects. And also in English, you should know the order is again fixed. In English, if you have two objects, indirect and direct, indirect always comes before the direct. So it's always subject, verb, indirect object, direct object. You have to say John gave Mary a bunch of flowers. You cannot say John gave a bunch of flowers Mary. It's impossible. In Serbian you could do it. John je Mariji dao buket cveća, John je buket cveća dao Mariji. Sounds a little bit weird, but it's fully grammatical. In English, because of the first fixed word order, it's always indirect object and then direct object. So, and when it comes to the meanings that can help you identify the object, well, this is actually easy. There are only a couple of meanings of the object. So object is typically the theme, what you're talking about, who's affected by the verbal activity. So Mary killed John. John is obviously affected by the verbal activity. He was alive, now he's dead. So that's what we mean by the object as the theme. Somebody who's affected by the verbal activity. The object can also be the result of the verbal activity. So when you say he wrote a letter didn't exist. A typical example of this would be, let's say, Steve Jobs invented a modern touchscreen cell phone with the iPhone. So Steve Jobs is the agent, he's the one who invented it, but what he invented, a modern cell phone with touchscreen interface, that's the result. So this is the second typical meaning of the object. So it's either affected by the verb or it was created by the verb. Very rarely it's the location when you cross the river or the instrument. We are using the computer to stream this lecture, so we are using the computer is the instrument. But typically direct object is affected or created by the verbal activity. But that's only the direct object. As I mentioned, just like in Serbian, you also have the indirect object. And here there are only two meanings. This can help you a lot. So if you think something is an indirect object, you have trouble passivizing and deciding if it's an indirect object. Think about the meaning. The indirect object is usually the possessor or recipient, somebody who owns or receives something. So Mary gave John a kiss. John received a kiss. He's the recipient. And very rarely it is the theme, something that is affected by the verbal activity. Bill gave the car a wash. You see, the car was affected by Bill's activity, so it received the wash. And the last sentence element that you know from Serbian is an adverbial. Sorry, I messed up the animation. So adverbial can be many things. It can be an adverb phrase like soon. It can be a prepositional phrase like in the morning. It can be a clause like when we meet in private. It can be a noun phrase like next week. But whatever it is mobile. You can say soon I will explain everything. You don't have to say I will explain everything soon, but you cannot say Mary the bunch of flowers John gave. You see, objects and other sentence elements cannot be moved, only adverbial can be freely moved. Or you can actually put it somewhere else. I will soon explain everything. I will explain everything in the morning. I will, in the morning, explain everything. In the morning, I will explain everything. I will explain everything when we meet in private. When we meet in private, I will explain everything. And most importantly, it's optional. It can be added or removed. You can simply say, instead of all these sentences, you can say, I will explain everything. When it comes to the meaning is actually quite useful. Adverbials have many meanings, such as process, how you do something. I treated him badly, I examined him with a microscope. Space, place, location, direction, goal, anything that has to do with space. Mary lives in a village. Time, have you seen her today? But what is really important for you, what I didn't put in the slide because I ran out of time, I was still preparing the presentation this morning, question words. Except for who and what. Who and what are question words for the subject. You can identify adverbial by simply asking any other question word. So if, for example, you don't know what sentence element is when we meet in private, ask a question so that the answer is when we meet in private. When will I explain everything? When we meet in private. The fact that you use the when, why, how, what for, how often, so all these questions except for who and what. Who and what identify subjects and objects, but how, why, when, where, what for, how often, etc. All other question words except for who and what, they identify adverbials. So if you have a sentence element and you ask a question about it, so I will explain everything next week. When will I explain everything? Next week. That the fact that you use the when, not who or what, proves that it's an adverbial. So that's the meaning of adverbials. And finally, you have two sentence elements that proved especially problematic in practice classes. The success rate in identifying them was under 50%. They are the subject and the object complement. So I created some slides on this. So again, I used Eric Cartman, and you know that he killed Kenny. So knowing what he did, you can say Eric Cartman is a very bad person. So subject, verb. And now a very bad person is not an object. You cannot passivize it. You cannot say a very bad person is been by Eric Cartman. Sounds terrible. So it's not an object. What it does is, I try to explain it in some practice classes, it simply tells you, like in Russian, Eric Cartman equals a very bad person. You know that, for example, one of the groups heard it, but maybe we can share it with the other words, other groups. So I'm just using my phone now, which is not a good thing in the lecture, but I'm doing it for scientific purposes. So you will hear Google Assistant now. Just a second. How do you say in Russian, he's an idiot?
In Russian, that's он идиот.
Did you hear it?
Он идиот.
On idiot. There is no verb to be. On idiot. On equals idiot. In Serbian we have a similar construction when you say ko idiot. That means like koji je on idiot. But what I'm trying to tell you in English, because of the syntactic rules, the rules of grammar, we always need the verb. But this verb is, in Eric Cartman is a very bad person, doesn't mean anything. This verb doesn't extend its meaning like John killed, Eric Cartman killed Kenny. Kill does something to Kenny. Is doesn't do anything to a very bad person. Is simply says Eric Cartman equals a very bad person. And that's the subject complement. It simply describes the subject. And the verb, this is the important thing. The verb, when you have a subject complement, usually has virtually no meaning. There are only 3 or 4 verbs which allow subject complement. So Eric Cartman is a very bad person. Eric Cartman became a very bad person. Eric Cartman seems to be a bad person. So with seems to be construction. And from the top of my head, virtually nothing else. So be, become, and seem. So they are the verbs which introduce the subject complement. The problematic thing here, of course, is that be is one of the top 10 words in English, so one of the most common words in English. So it's not very unlikely that you will encounter a subject complement. And just like you have a subject complement, you can also have the object complement. Eric Cartman cut Kenny dead with a knife. I checked it with a friend of mine who lives in Texas, and he says it's a wonderful grammatical sentence, but not a wonderful sentence from the point of view of human relationships, but it's grammatically okay. So Kenny equals dead because Eric Cartman cut him with a knife. So dead describes Kenny. That's the object complement. That's the meaning of the complement. So when you talk about complements, they are noun phrases like, let's say, Bill became the president. They can be adjective phrases like Hillary is very happy that Trump is losing. Hillary's behavior is beyond reproach, which is not true. That's a prepositional phrase. And that can be, they can also be clauses. The bottom line is that they agreed. The bottom line is that they agreed is a clause. So don't think of a subject complement as, you know, single noun, like John is a student. It can be a phrase like the president of the party. It can be an adjective like very happy. It can be a prepositional phrase. For example, the most common, let's say, example for prepositional phrase is not beyond reproach. The most common example for complement in a prepositional phrase form is in love. John is in love. So in love is not a place. It's not like John is in London. John is in London. In London is an adverbial. But when you say John is in love, it's not a physical place that he's inhabiting. In love is like a metaphorical extension, so John is in love is a wonderful example of a subject complement. John equals in love. So what is a complement? It's the sentence element that follows the subject and the verb if it's a subject complement, or it follows the object if it's the object complement. And you can see that it's not the object because you cannot passivize it. So that's one of the tricks. When it comes to the meanings, so if you have something that looks like an object but cannot be passivized, then the chance is it's a subject complement. So John is a doctor. You cannot say a doctor is been by John. Subject complement is simply the attribute of the subject. It describes the property of the subject. Mary seems unhappy. You describe Mary's mental state. Mary turned pale. You describe Mary's physical state. Sorry, this is actually wrong. I will fix this, but I cannot do it now. So subject is never the theme of the sentence. It's actually, subject complement is not the theme of the sentence. It's the subject. This is copy and paste. So I will delete this. And object component is the attribute of the object. Mary likes her tea hot, so the tea has the attribute of being hot. John painted the walls blue. The walls are now blue. Walls equal blue because he painted them. So that's actually what I prepared in terms of definitions of sentence elements, and I hope that you will find this useful, especially if you rewind it and watch it again if there are issues. But I went further than that. This, let's say, provides a general description of sentence elements, but it takes time to really, understand this, to practice this. So I provided another hack that you can use to simplify this process. So you can identify sentence elements by learning these definitions, looking at examples, but you can actually, there is a way to determine that something is a constituent, something is a sentence element. And these are the so-called constituency tests. So there are certain transformations in grammar that allow you to determine if something is a sentence element, and even to determine what kind of a sentence element that is. So you can learn the definitions, you can understand the definitions, but then you can also use these tests that I will now show you to identify the basic sentence elements. So let me present you with constituency tests. So constituency tests can be classified into several groups. I created this nice, let's say, animated art here. So the first group is called substitution. The second group is called movement. Then you have questions, deletion, and you also have something called focalizing. Most of them are mentioned in the workbook, but they are scattered around, the whole unit. And there's one which I often mention in these lectures, but is not actually even mentioned in your workbook, and that's the passive transformation. So you have 6 types of tests, and now I will walk you through these tests and show you which of these tests allows you to identify which sentence elements, so what is their usability. So substitution is one of the most useful tests, but it doesn't really always help you identify what sentence element you're talking about. So if you have a sentence such as the young student will meet his friend at the cafeteria after class, sentence elements are typically in everyday conversation shortened through proforms. What are proforms? Proforms are short forms that allow us to speak efficiently. So instead of saying the young student, you can say he, or you can say she. You cannot have a proform really for the main verb, so you have to say he will meet, but then instead of his friend, you say her, instead of at the cafeteria, you say there, and instead of after class, you say then. So out of the young student will meet his friend at the cafeteria after class, you get he will meet her there then. So the choice of these proforms can help you identify the constituent. So if you use pronouns, and by the way, this is the explanation why pronouns are called pronouns. Pronouns are just a subtype of proforms. So pronouns are called pronouns because they replace noun phrases and nominal clauses. So the young student is a noun phrase, so you replace it with the pronoun, he. So sentence elements that are replaced with pronouns are usually subjects and objects. The young student is a subject, his friend is the object. You see, you replace both of them with a pronoun. He will meet her. But of course, both he and her are pronouns, so it's not, it's not 100% accurate. But at least with this test, you know that the young student is, it can be replaced with a pronoun, so it's either the subject or the object. And then, since it's in front of the verb, you know that it's the subject. He will meet her, so it's either subject or the object, but because it's behind the verb, you know it's an object. So it's useful. There and then are adverbs. They are not pronouns. There and then are adverbs. So if you replace a sentence element with an adverb, so the young student will meet his friend there and then, this proves that at the cafeteria and after class are adverbials. Don't confuse these two words. They are not the same. Adverb is a part of speech. There and then, these are adverbs. But in the sentence, they perform the function of adverbials. So don't do that. That's a very common mistake. You will be really, you will lose the respect of professors in the 2nd, 3rd, and the 4th year, and I will be blamed if you make that mistake. But just be aware. There is an adverb. It is a proform for adverbials. So this test, substitution, is actually very useful. I have additional slides here which explain this. So proforms that are nominal, they replace subjects and objects. Adverbial proforms, they replace adverbials. And actually you will have these slides uploaded as a PDF, so I will skip this because I just explained this. When it comes to ellipsis, it's actually the least useful of all the tests. Ellipsis simply means that you can delete the predication. She hoped that they would play a Mozart quartet, and they will play a Mozart quartet. So ellipsis is simply a good test to identify predication, nothing else. So just forget about ellipsis. Ellipsis is actually useless. Movement, on the other hand, is very useful. So it's especially useful for adverbials. After class, the young student will meet his friend in the library. The young student will meet his friend in the library after class. Only adverbials can be moved this freely. So if you can move the sentence element around the sentence, it's an adverbial. So movement is especially useful for identifying adverbials. As soon as you can move the element, it's an adverbial. I mentioned, when we were talking about the subject, object, and the adverbial, constituency questions. So who and what are questions which identify the subject and the object. John is waiting for a friend of his from China. So who is John waiting for, or who is waiting for a friend of his from China? You see, who can be used for either the subject or the object. So it's useful in the sense that if there's a sentence element which answers the question who or what, that's the subject or the object. And then based on the position relative to the verb, you can say it is either the subject or the object. All other questions, for example, the young student will meet his friend at the cafeteria after lunch. Where will he meet his friend? When will he meet his friend? Why he will meet his friend? How often does he meet his friend? All other question words except who and what are adverbial. So constituency questions are really useful. Based on what question word you use, you can identify adverbials or subject and the object. Who and what for subject, object, everything else, why, when, how often, etc. are adverbials. Deletion is also very useful for adverbials. So optional constituents, and these are adverbials, can be deleted. So you can say the young student will meet his friend. Full stop. You don't have to say when, you don't have to say why or where. So these are adverbials. Why and where and when, they are adverbial questions. But you cannot delete the object. You cannot say the young student will meet at the cafeteria after class. You have to say who will be met by the young student. So the object is obligatory. So deletion is useful for identifying adverbials. So if it can be deleted, it's an optional adverbial. The tricky part here is there are a couple of adverbials that are obligatory, but they are not so common. Finally, I mentioned this only in group that I practiced with at noon on Tuesday. So for other groups, this is new. This is one of the best tests that allows you to identify every sentence elements except for the verb. So it's called focalizing. Some people call it a cleft sentence, but let me explain. So I color-coded sentence elements. The young student is the subject, will meet is the verb, his friend is the object, at the cafeteria is the first adverbial, after class is another adverbial. So using a cleft sentence, you can identify, for example, the subject. You can say it is the young student who will meet his friend at the cafeteria after class. Notice that you use who here. So this actually shows you that this is the subject. You remember who and what are used for subjects and objects. You can also identify the direct object. It is his friend whom the young student will meet at the cafeteria after class. Very few people would use whom here. Most people are really sloppy with their grammar, but actually if you are properly educated in English, you know that here whom is the only correct choice, and the reason for this is that his friend is actually the object. Now notice what happens if you focus on his friend. It is sorry, not his friend, at the cafeteria after class. It is after class when the young student will meet his friend at the cafeteria. Or it is after it is at the cafeteria where the young student will meet his friend after class. So in other words, you see, with this focalizing construction, you can identify the subject, who will be followed by the who word, object that will be followed by whom, and adverbials which will be followed by when, where, why, etc. So actually you can identify every single element except for the verb itself. So this is one of the best tests to, so if you are not sure about how to analyze a sentence, try to do this. It is blah 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 who, it is blah 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 whom, it is blah 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 when, it is blah 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 where, it is blah 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 why. And finally, for identifying the subject and the object, the passive transformation is probably the most elegant choice. You can identify the subject, indirect, and the direct object. So the young student will give the dean a new petition, the dean will be given a new petition by the students. That's actually an example of how passivization, so whatever comes in the subject position of the passive sentence is actually the object of the active sentence. So this way you identify both the subject and the object, because what ends in the by phrase, by the young student, that's actually the subject of the active sentence. So only works with verbs that have objects, of course. If you don't have an object, this doesn't work, but that's also a good piece of information. If you cannot passivize it, it's not an object, it doesn't contain an object. So to wrap it all up, we have subjects, verbs, complements, and objects, and they are considered obligatory sentence elements. And there are adverbials which are usually optional, but couple of them are obligatory. And to identify them, you can use one of these 6 tests which I showed you. And you can also use the theoretical knowledge on their meaning and general position and features which I presented before that. So at this point, I can ask you if you have some additional comments or questions, and I will allow you, of course. I cannot see the Discord screen, I apologize. The problem is that I'm running the presentation, screenshot recorder, Discord, and PowerPoint all at the same time. So, my window is, it's too much for Windows. But feel free to unmute yourselves, ask something.
Will you email us the test?
These, I will upload them to the website as a PDF. Wonderful high resolution PDF.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
In the old days, I started uploading PowerPoints, but then many people complain that they cannot open them easily on, for example, cell phones. So I decided that PDF is a better choice. Don't worry, you will have it by, let's say, 2 p.m. today. So I just have to export it and make sure everything's visible. Okay. So I counted to 5. You heard about this. This is called the 5-second rule. If nobody speaks over 5 seconds of silence, then it's okay to continue. So the last thing that I wanted to address in terms of sentence elements is optionality. So we talked about it in practice in all groups. This is the topic that popped up, but we didn't really address it in details. We were more like, we jumped into the sea being, non-swimmers. We flapped our feet and arms, etc., trying not to sink. But here I will try to do it, in an organized way. So you remember, grammar doesn't care about the meaning. So when we say that something is an optional sentence element, we will change the meaning of the sentence. So the meaning of the sentence will be changed. There's no doubt about it. When you say the student will meet his friend after classes at the cafeteria, when you say the student will meet his friend, and you don't provide at the cafeteria after class, of course that the sentence is, let's say, poor in its meaning. It doesn't mean the same. What we care about in terms of meaning is only the verb. The verb should not change its meaning. So when we say that something is optional, as long as you can delete it and the meaning of the verb doesn't change, it's optional. The meaning of the sentence, we don't care about it. So this takes some time to get used to. This is a new way of thinking, but this is actually how grammar, syntax, and linguistics works in terms at least of syntax, morphology, phonology, etc. We don't really care about the meaning of the sentence. We care about the meaning of the verb itself. So when you say he kissed Mary on the cheek versus he kissed Mary, does kiss 1 and kiss 2 mean the same? Yes, they do. So this is on the cheek is an optional adverbial. But if you say he will live in New York versus he will live 1 and live 2 are not the same. Live 1 means inhabit, live 2 means survive. So by deleting in New York, you actually change the meaning of the verb to live. Live no longer means inhabit a place, live means survive. That's the boundary of optionality. I actually created some additional slides to, I think this is like a good introduction, but let me elaborate on that. Generally speaking, we have to distinguish between 2 types of adverbials, those that are obligatory and optional. So in New York is an obligatory adverbial when you say he will live in New York. On the cheek is an optional adverbial. This option doesn't exist for other sentence elements. Subject is always obligatory, verb is obligatory, object, if it exists, is obligatory, complement is obligatory. It's only with adverbials that you have this option for the adverbial to be obligatory or optional. So generally speaking, the test that you can use to determine if something is really an optional adverbial is deletion. If you delete it and the meaning of the verb doesn't change, it's optional. If you can move it around, it should be optional. So Eric Cartman killed Kenny. There's nothing that you can delete here. You can say Eric Cartman Kenny, that's ungrammatical. Killed Kenny, ungrammatical. Eric Cartman killed, that could be grammatical, but then instead of, finished action, ubio je Kenija, you would have like a long-lasting activity. Eric Cartman je ubijao, like he's a serial killer. But if you add optional adverbials, you see, you can add as many as 3 or 4 of them and move them around. It will be, as if nothing is happening. They are completely optional. Last night in the gym, Eric Cartman viciously killed Kenny with a knife. Eric Cartman viciously killed Kenny with a knife in the gym last night. The important thing for you to remember is that the boundary of optionality is the verb. And I can also show it to you through these, let's say, examples. Eric Cartman asks Kenny a simple question. This, you would analyze this as subject, verb. Kenny is indirect object. A simple question is a direct object. You can prove it. You can say a simple question was asked Kenny by Eric Cartman. Kenny was asked a simple question by Eric Cartman. And then you can translate it as Eric Cartman je postavio Keniju jednostavno pitanje, ili Eric Cartman je Keniju postavio jednostavno pitanje. I mean, stylistically it's okay. Notice what happens if you delete a simple question. You can still say Eric Hartman asked Kenny, but now you cannot say Eric Hartman je postavio Keniju, or you have to say something else. You have to say Eric Hartman je pitao nešto Kenija, or something like that. So that's actually what proves that the direct object, a simple question, is not optional. The meaning of the verb changed. For a native speaker, this is very difficult to notice if they are not trained in linguistics. They will say, but okay, it's like the same verb. But the meaning of the verb is slightly changed. And the same applies to this verb live. So you see, Eric Hartman živi u South Parku versus Eric Hartman lives, Eric Hartman je živ. So the boundary of optionality is the verb, the meaning of the verb, not the meaning of the sentence, which I actually have here as the bottom of the very last slide in this section. And now we have 8 minutes remaining, which is just enough time to introduce you to the most useful hack for analyzing sentence elements. So what I showed you so far is very useful, I think, and I hope. But there's the third hack, and that's actually also part of your workbook. Some of these things that I mentioned here are not contained in the workbook, so I suggest you use these slides and video recordings to prepare for the exam, but this part is actually in the workbook. It's about clause types. You remember, we defined sentences as syntactic units expressing the relationship of predication. Now, what this definition means is that every sentence has a predicate. And in English, every predicate is a verb phrase. So the verb element is realized through a verb phrase, and every sentence must contain this verbal element. So fundamentally, the verb phrase is the most important constituent. That's what I call the one ring of syntax. The one ring of syntax is the verb. The verb controls everything. It binds all other rings, all other sentence elements, and does what it wills with them. So in other words, not verbs, the verb phrase and the verb as a syntactic constituent determines everything else in the sentence. The good news here is that we live in the year of 2020. It's a terrible year, but apart from COVID and everything else, this year marks more than 3 millennia almost of studying grammar and more than several centuries of studying English grammar. And based on those hundreds of years of linguistic, analysis and research work, we know that there are only 7 types of clauses, 7 types of combinations of these subject, verb, object, complement, adverbial elements. So every single sentence that you encounter in English will belong to one of these 7 patterns. Many people say that this also is why babies can acquire language, because the actual number of structures that they have to figure out is small. It's under a dozen. It's actually almost half a dozen. So only 7 patterns exist. And in English, it's even more beautiful, because unlike Serbian, English always must have a subject. So it's in English, you pronounce the subject. It's not like in Serbian when you say čitam. In English, of course, you have to say I čitam, ja čitam, I am reading. And these are the 7 types. They are classified in 2 groups. Intensive, so these are verbs that do not require an object. They require a complement or an adverbial. So these are verbs which fundamentally describe the subject through an adverbial or a complement. And extensive verbs, they are called extensive because they extend their meaning onto an object. So intensive, it means the meaning of the verb is internal, or there's no meaning at all. Extensive means the meaning is extended to the object. And these are the 7 types. So what I'm trying to tell you, so you have you have 6 tests for constituents. You have the slides on the meanings and the position and the function of sentence elements. But pair this with this particular slide. Every single verb will belong to, sorry, this is actually just color coding of what is here. Every single verb will belong to one of the, every single sentence will belong to one of these groups. SVC, subject verb complement, she is happy. Subject verb adverbial, she is in the room. Subject verb, she is sleeping, it is raining, John vanished, Mary disappeared. SVO, she wrote the letter, I bought a book. SVOO, I gave her the book. And SVOC and SVOA, if you are not sure where I'm actually pointing to, so I'm pointing to this column here. So SVOO, I gave her the book. SVOC, I made him angry. And SVOA, she put the book on the shelf. Every single sentence, no matter how many optional adverbials it has, when it comes to obligatory elements, these are only obligatory elements that are listed in the pattern, will belong to one of these 7 types. So, for example, when you analyze a sentence and you get the, let's say, the analysis which is SVCO, that's not possible. Or you should earn a Nobel Prize for a new sentence pattern in English. But believe me, it's very unlikely. People have been analyzing this for centuries, and these are the 7 patterns. There is nothing else in English. So if your analysis doesn't produce one of these patterns, you can have as many as 10 optional adverbials, but when it comes to obligatory adverbials, only these are the possibilities. Then you did something wrong. What do we call these classes? Well, intensive ones, SVC, John is happy, SVA, John is in London. Extensive are called intransitive if there is no object, that's something like John vanished. And transitive ones contain an object. Monotransitive, she bought a book. Ditransitive, she gave Mary a book. Complex transitive means that there's an object and either a complement or an adverbial. John considers Mary intelligent, it's object complement, or John put the book on the shelf. Put the book on the shelf is adverbial, obligatory adverbial. So that's the final hack that I leave you with at the end of this lecture. There are only 7 types of sentences. No matter how you analyze your sentence, you did it incorrectly if it's not one of these patterns. And now, armed with all these things from today's lecture, I hope that you will become ninjas of syntactic analysis, and you will be able to do this seamlessly and without any issues. But I want to actually add something else. You know this. Even if you have hard time doing this, you actually know this. You understand English. When I say John lived in New York for many years, you know that I was talking about John, that he lived in a place, that the place was New York, and that he probably no longer lives there. So when I say John lived in New York for many years, you didn't understand it as, I don't know, Mary's sister bought a bicycle. You understand the sentence, which means that you actually, your brain, that's actually a compliment to your English skills and English use. You do this subconsciously all the time. In order to understand what the sentence means, it means that you do this analysis subconsciously. It's just that your level of English knowledge and English use is so high that it has become second nature for you. It's almost like your native tongue. So what we need to do here in this course is actually like Jedi training in a way. You have to learn how to use the Force, how to actually consciously do what right now you can only do subconsciously. If you watch these, TV series about people with superpowers, The Boys, or something like that. So, you should not be able to just do it when you are angry, let's say. If you watch The Boys, you know what I'm talking about. What you should be able to do is to do it, consciously, and that makes you a linguist and an English language expert. The good news is you are doing it subconsciously. The bad news is it will take some time to actually understand what you're doing subconsciously and be able to do it consciously just like that. And the best news of all is that actually many previous generations did this same thing, and it takes just a couple of weeks to get used to this way of analyzing sentences, and you will be more than ready for the exam. Okay, we are 2 minutes over time. Time is of the essence. Time is precious. You may have some other lectures to attend online, physical. So questions, comments. We can devote maybe 2 more minutes.
Professor, is it possible for you to pre-send us the presentations or emails, or to upload them to the website, because we can't really see the stream, number of us.
Yeah, I heard about that. So I'm thinking also about maybe a different platform for next week, but I will send you the email with the presentation, but I will not attach the presentations because some of them tend to be more than 20 megabytes in size. You will simply have a link to Google Drive, so you will be able to download them. But I noticed that more than 115 of you out of 122 are using Gmail. So in Gmail you will be able to open those attachments directly. So if you're using Outlook or Live, actually even there you will be able to see the Google links pop up in the pop-up window. So yeah, okay, no worries. It will be on the website, but I will also make sure you receive an email. Good.
That would be great. Thank you, Professor.
Okay, in that case, I counted to 5, the 5-second rule. There was the silence. So I wish you a pleasant day, the rest of it. Be productive, relax, whatever is on your agenda for the rest of the day. And I will see you face-to-face on Tuesday. But you will receive an email with the presentation and also the link once more to the course website, where hopefully by 2 p.m. we will have both these lectures, the previous one and today's one, and all the slides again on the website. So thank you, and I will be now stopping my screen sharing, and I will be closing the Discord. It's cute. Važi, pozdrav, sve najbolje. Bye bye, doviđenja.
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 Ne još.